Okay. I hope I'm audible as well. Thank you, ma'am. Okay. My paper is titled The Politics of Damage and the Dialectics of Urban Voice in Nirvana. Very few people have, acknowledged the importance of punk rock. And Kurt Cobain, for me, has always been a modeler of what Ferguson has caused the politics of damage. Ferguson adopts the phrase the politics of damage in her characterization of the political content of Nirvana's music, arguing that Cobain and his fellow grunge balladeers never really aspire to protest, preferring to remain mired in their own sense of inadequacy. The inverted pose of the music mirrors the incoherence of the left and the replacement of class politics with self-help politics. Agential performative spaces are disrupted by the disabilities in the corporeal epistemology when the flat ontology of alienation corroborates with biome. In the scope of necrosis and zoisa, we find the biopolitics and ethical paradigm conflate with the aesthetic projects. And I have selected particularly two of the songs of Nirvana by Kurt Cobain from the album of Uterio in 1993. First song is Rape Me. So the song illustrates several elements of Nirvana's standard practice in formal, melodic, and textural term. The calm simplicity of the verse, to which 4 lines of the text are set, concludes with a spitfire crescendo in the raucous refrain, which itself comprises 4 statements of a single line of the text. The repetition of the text is very intrinsic and in this fashion characteristic of punk in general, accentuates the restlessness of music. But instead of sounding simply like punk, Rape Me comes across as a classic pop song, if perhaps stripped down to its post-punk garments. Textures in block alternation and unproblematic formal procedures and structures. Sudden shifts with a terraced dynamic plan and a notably narrow range of the vocal line. Now, if you see the lyrics, they are pretty simple when it comes to that. But the idea of the movement from a simple balladeer to punk is very important. It starts with the scale A and moves to C, then E, and then G. So the first repetition of 4 lines is like this. Rape me, my friend, rape me again. So it moves into the A, and then the grunge sets in. I am not the only one. 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 And then it goes back to rape me, rape me, my friend, rape me again. So what becomes very important is the tracks moves from just simple punk to punk rock. While many of Nirvana's tracks appear to deal with the condition of the contemporary subject, often the female subject, for instance in Polly, in Rape Me, in Penny Royalty, the penultimate track from In Ulterio, that is the Tourette, which means dysfunctionality or disability, where your mind cannot control your bodily action. Tourette presents a notably an extreme case. The track itself is no more than a minute and a half in length. It opens with a sparse, distorted guitar attacks and induced feedback, over which Cobain ironically intones the lead guitar. And that is where the hardcore punk comes in from the moderate rock phase. And the track itself shows that how Cobain ironically intones the phrase moderate rock. A cycling of 4-chord sequence on bass and lead guitar is soon accompanied by heavy drum pattern typical of hardcore punk. The main body of the track divides into 5 recognizable sections, 2 verse sections and a final section which function as a kind of coda, and a 2 bridge section. In standard musicological term, it starts with A, B, and then goes to C. The bridge section involves the repetition of a single riff. It comes as a refrain, and this particular riff is very important because it's overlaid with a series of interjections and extended screams, and it comes from the throat. And that scream is where Nirvana actually tries to enter into a non-dialogical phase. The track concludes rather as it began, with a confusion of a fractured attack and induced feedback, while Cobain's final utterance modulates into a series of moans like ah, and then it just goes and it just goes on. And this before fading out, and finally there is a fading out. The vocal utterances remain almost indecipherable throughout, although those of the verse section are clearly distinct from the repeated utterances of the final section. The title itself refers to a particular form of behavioral disorder in which the sufferer involuntarily exhibits compulsive and compulsory bodily movement or verbal exclamations, which often takes the form of obscene utterances or gestures of the modus of undisciplined, non-agential body of an alienated generation. To conclude, the explicit madness of Tourette doubles back and draws attention to the implicit normality on which the contingent notion of madness depend. This is not to ignore the obvious differences that exist between Foucault's systematic theoretic genealogy of power and Adorno's psychoanthropological dialectic of enlightenment. Despite various defensive apologetics, there is an underlying relativism to the Foucault's thought that distinguishes it from the emphatic notion of truth central to Adorno's thought. But it is to suggest that against the portrayal of a suffocating mesh of an ubiquitous domination to which both were driven, Tourette can be seen not only as a reflective of that condition, but also, and crucially, as articulating an unrealized emancipatory potential that remains in dialectical counterpart. In short, it is a musical quote-unquote return of the repressed. Very importantly, return of the repressed. And there is an inherent sense in to the apparent nonsense. If Tourette succumbs to the temptation to lose it, as both Adorno and the vernacular would have it, then it does so with a spectral and structural in expression of a far more effective than simple anarchic senselessness. And quoting Courtney Love, his lady love, Cobain's lady love, whom Cobain loved, but well, Cobain never got it back. So anyway, quoting Courtney Love as having said that every kid in America who is being abused loved Kurt Cobain's music. She concludes that Nirvana made the abuse this generation's defining metaphor. And the hit Smells Like Teen Spirit was an anthem of powerless rage and betrayal. So, when we see the movement in the songs of Nirvana, we are faced with the inversion of a politicized systematization of order. The real gets refractive and the closure finds itself open to the subverted real, including it in the reigning discourse and therewith the subject to a discursive attack. This is exactly what Foucault wants in his discourse of sexuality, and as a thinker of crisis, he is implicitly committed to the notion that the reigning order, whatever its nature, is degraded. And that is what Kurt Cobain is doing as well. The reigning order of American cosmopolitanism, of American consumerism is a decay. And that non discursive violence is what comes out when he bangs his guitar. And Cobain's strings exhibit the violence of a modus operandi for orgasmic catharsis. But his parodic undercutting of it makes catharsis impossible. The nuances of torture, which has Dionysiac rapture, becomes a comic farce of prose consumerism when Cobain is ending them. I would like to point out how sexuality converges and diverges from social to non-social in Rape Me, and finally the alienation and this journey of my paper is also a journey from discourse of spatiality of the body to the temporality of sexuality and violence in the social constructionism. From page to stage, Cobain's music is not simply a theoretical architecture but also an exploration of the endless possibilities and probabilities of human construct in the being of society and politics. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I think the intersectionality of